May 11, 1945. 0347 hours. Dingalan Bay, Luzon. John McKinney was asleep when the blade cut him. Not deep, not fatal, but deep enough that blood soaked through his undershirt before he understood what was happening. The Japanese soldier who swung the sword was already dead by the time McKinney's eyes fully opened, killed by rifle fire from Private Lester Hammond 2 seconds earlier. But the damage was done. A 4-inch gash across McKinney's left shoulder. Hot blood, cold sweat, and the realization that the perimeter was gone. He could hear them, voices in the dark. Japanese infantry moving through the outpost like water through a broken dam. 70 yards away, maybe less. The M1919A4 machine gun, the one that was supposed to hold this flank, the one that 7 men had died protecting over the last 11 days, was silent, which meant it was theirs now. McKinney weighed 130 pounds. He was 19 years old, and he was alone. But let's go back. Because no one thought John McKinney would survive basic training, let alone earn a Medal of Honor. And absolutely no one believed his reload trick was worth a damn. 6 weeks earlier. March 29, 1945. Forward Operating Base, 12 miles south of Dingalan Bay. The first time McKinney showed them the trick, they laughed. Sergeant Donald Kurtz actually laughed out loud. So did Corporal Eddie Fain. Private First Class Harold Meeks, who would be dead in 9 days, shook his head and walked away. McKinney had just demonstrated a method for reloading his M1 Garand without taking his eyes off the target. A little thumb technique. A tiny adjustment in grip angle. Something he'd worked out on his own during the 23-hour transport from Leyte. "Kid," Kurtz said, "the Garand ejects when it's empty. You hear the ping, you reload. That's it. We don't need Georgia backwoods voodoo." McKinney didn't argue. He just nodded, cleaned his rifle, and kept practicing. He practiced at night when the others slept. He practiced during downtime when they played cards. He practiced until the motion became unconscious. Thumb, push, click, ready. 4 seconds flat, sometimes 3.8 if his hands were dry. The trick wasn't speed for speed's sake. It was about maintaining sight picture. About keeping the enemy in your peripheral vision while your hands did the work. About not looking down. But no one cared. "You trying to show off, McKinney?" Lieutenant Paul Hendricks asked him one afternoon, voice heavy with irritation. "No, sir." "Then quit wasting ammunition on drills nobody asked for." "Yes, sir." Hendricks turned to the rest of the squad. "Standard reload procedure is standard for a reason. We're not reinventing doctrine because some farm boy thinks he's special." McKinney said nothing. He was used to this. Used to being the smallest, the quietest, the one from nowhere, Georgia, who barely made the weight requirement and whose uniform sleeves were always too long. He'd grown up hunting whitetail in Screven County pine forests where you got one shot before the deer vanished into the brush. You learned to reload fast or you went hungry. But the Army wasn't interested in deer. And they sure as hell weren't interested in tricks. Still, he kept practicing. April 3, 1945. Private First Class Eugene Mallory was the first to die because of the machine gun problem. It happened at dawn. The Japanese had started using coordinated mortar and rifle attacks to suppress the M1919A4 emplacement on the eastern perimeter. Every morning, same tactic. Mortars would bracket the position, forcing the gunner to take cover. Then riflemen would advance under the smoke. The gun would go silent for 15, maybe 20 seconds. Just long enough for the enemy to close the distance. Mallory was assistant gunner that morning. When the mortars hit, he stayed on the gun. Kept firing. Kept them at bay. But a Type 89 knee mortar round landed 3 feet to his left. Shrapnel tore through his neck and chest. He bled out before the medic reached him. The official cause of death was fragmentation wounds sustained during defensive operations. But everyone knew the real reason. The machine gun emplacement was exposed, poorly fortified, and command hadn't authorized the relocation request that Sergeant Kurtz had filed 8 days earlier. McKinney helped carry Mallory's body to the collection point. The smell stayed with him for days. Blood and jungle rot and wet canvas. He didn't sleep well after that. April 7, 1945. Private Leonard Shaw was next. Shaw was the new assistant gunner. Younger than McKinney, heavier, louder. He talked constantly about his girl back in Ohio and how he was going to marry her the day he got home. He showed everyone her picture at least twice a day. She had dark hair and a nice smile, and Shaw said her name was Dorothy, which he pronounced carefully, like it was sacred. The Japanese mortars came again at 0520 hours. Shaw took a direct hit. There was no body to carry this time. Just pieces. Just boots and dog tags and a wallet with Dorothy's picture inside. Untouched by the blast. Perfectly intact. McKinney stopped talking to the other men after that. He cleaned his rifle. He practiced his reload. And he watched the machine gun emplacement with something close to hatred. April 11th, 1945. Corporal Eddie Fain died covering the gun. Fain was the one who'd laughed at McKinney's reload trick. Big guy. Ex-boxer from Pittsburgh. He'd volunteered to take Shaw's place as assistant gunner because nobody else wanted it. "Somebody's gotta do it," he said. "Might as well be me." The Japanese attacked at dusk this time. Different tactic. No mortars. Just a straight rifle charge through the undergrowth. Fain stayed on the gun and cut down 11 of them before a 7.7mm Arisaka round punched through his helmet. He slumped forward onto the trigger, and the gun kept firing for 3 seconds until someone pulled him off. They buried him the next morning. McKinney stood at the edge of the grave and thought about how Fain had laughed. How he'd said Georgia backwoods voodoo. How he'd never believed McKinney's trick was worth anything. 3 men. 11 days. All because of one exposed machine gun. And command still wouldn't authorize the relocation. April 14th, 1945. 2,230 hours. Lieutenant Hendricks called McKinney into the command tent. "You're taking assistant gunner," Hendricks said. No preamble. No sympathy. "Sir, I'm a rifleman. You were a rifleman. Now you're assistant gunner. Report to the emplacement at 0600. McKinney felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Sir, that position is compromised. We've lost 3 men in. I'm aware of the casualties, Private. You have your orders." "Yes, sir." He left the tent and walked back to his foxhole in the dark. His shoulder ached where he'd strained it hauling sandbags earlier that day. His hands smelled like gun oil and dirt. Above him, the sky was black and starless, choked with humidity and the promise of rain that never came. He sat down, checked his rifle, checked it again, and then he made a decision. If command wouldn't relocate the gun, he'd fix it himself. April 15th, 1945. 0200 hours. McKinney moved through the outpost like a shadow. He wasn't supposed to be out of his foxhole. Movement after dark was prohibited unless you had a damn good reason and written authorization. But McKinney didn't care. He'd already decided he wasn't going to die because of someone else's bad call. He reached the machine gun emplacement and crouched low. The position was a disaster. Sandbags stacked too low. No overhead cover. Clear sight lines for enemy mortars and riflemen. The gun itself was bolted to a tripod mount that couldn't traverse more than 30 degrees without someone physically lifting and resetting it. Suicidal design. He'd been thinking about this for days, turning it over in his mind the way he used to think about deer stands back in Georgia. Angles, cover, lines of fire. And he'd come to one conclusion. The gun didn't need to be relocated. It needed to be freed. He pulled a pair of wire cutters from his pack, civilian-made, ordered from a Sears catalog 8 months ago and carried across 3,000 miles of ocean. He went to work on the tripod bolts. Slow, quiet. His hands shook slightly from adrenaline and the pain in his shoulder, but he kept going. 1 bolt, 2, 3. If Hendricks found out, he'd face disciplinary action. Maybe a court-martial. But 3 men were already dead, and McKinney wasn't interested in being the 4th. He loosened the bolts just enough that the gun could pivot freely on its mount. Not detached, not obviously tampered with, but mobile. Functional. Survivable. Then he heard footsteps. He froze. Someone was coming. He could hear boots on dirt. Slow. Deliberate. A patrol, maybe, or an officer doing rounds. He pressed himself flat against the sandbags and held his breath. The footsteps passed within 10 feet of him, kept going, faded into the distance. McKinney waited 5 full minutes before moving again. Then he finished the job, tightened one bolt to make it look secure, left the others loose, wiped down the tools, and slipped back to his foxhole before anyone noticed. He didn't sleep, just lay there staring at the dark, tasting blood in his mouth from where he'd bitten his lip, feeling the ache in his shoulder spread down his arm like fire. And he waited. April 16, 1945. Command held an inspection at 0800 hours. Lieutenant Hendricks walked the perimeter with Sergeant Kurtz, checking fortifications, checking weapon mounts, checking everything. They stopped at the machine gun emplacement. McKinney stood at attention, face blank, heart hammering. Hendricks crouched down, looked at the tripod, put his hand on the gun and gave it a light shake. The gun moved, just a fraction, just enough. Hendricks frowned. "This mount loose, Sergeant?" Kurtz stepped forward, inspected it. "No, sir. Bolts are tight." Hendricks shook it again. The gun swiveled slightly. "Doesn't feel tight." "It's within tolerance, sir. Pivot mechanism is supposed to have some give." That wasn't true. The mount wasn't supposed to pivot at all. But Kurtz said it with enough confidence that Hendricks let it go. "Fine. Make sure it's checked daily." "Yes, sir." They moved on. McKinney exhaled slowly. His hands were steady now, calm. No one knew. No one suspected. And that night, when he took his position as assistant gunner, he rested his hand on the modified tripod and felt something close to satisfaction. But satisfaction wouldn't save him, because the Japanese were coming. April 19, 1945. Private First Class Robert Castillo died at the gun. Castillo was the primary gunner. Quiet guy, deeply religious. He kept a rosary in his pocket and prayed before every shift. McKinney worked beside him for 3 days, learning the rhythms of the position, when to feed the belt, when to clear a jam, when to duck. The attack came at 0630 hours. Mortars first, as always, then rifles. Then a banzai charge, 15 Japanese soldiers screaming through the smoke with bayonets fixed. Castillo held the trigger down and cut through them like wheat. 10 dead, 12, 14. Then a mortar round landed behind the emplacement. The blast threw McKinney 6 feet forward into the dirt. His ears rang. His vision blurred. When he looked back, Castillo was gone. Just gone. The gun was still there, smoking and intact, but Castillo was scattered across the sandbags in pieces too small to identify. McKinney crawled back, grabbed the gun, swung it hard to the left, his modification allowing it to pivot freely, and opened fire on the remaining Japanese soldiers. 3 more down. 4, 5. The attack broke. The enemy retreated. McKinney sat there shaking, covered in blood that wasn't his, holding a machine gun that had just saved his life because he'd illegally modified it in the middle of the night. Sergeant Kurtz found him 20 minutes later. "You okay, McKinney?" "No." Kurtz looked at the bodies, looked at the gun, looked at McKinney. "That mount's loose," he said quietly. "Yes, Sergeant." "You do that." McKinney met his eyes. "Yes, Sergeant." Kurtz was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good work." He walked away, never mentioned it again. But Lieutenant Hendricks did. April 22, 1945. 1100 hours. Hendricks called McKinney into the command tent and chewed him out for 15 straight minutes. "You tampered with military equipment without authorization. You violated standing orders. You endangered the entire position by making unauthorized modifications to a crew-served weapon." "Sir, the modification saved." "I don't care what it saved, Private. You don't get to make those calls. You follow orders. You follow doctrine. You do not freelance." McKinney said nothing. "If I had the time or the inclination, I'd have you court-martialed. But I don't. So here's what's going to happen. You're going back to rifleman duty. You're off the gun. And if I catch you tampering with equipment again, I'll personally see to it that you spend the rest of this war in a stockade. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." "Get out." McKinney left. His shoulder still ached. His hands still smelled like gun oil. And he still had his M1 Garand, which was all he really needed. He went back to his foxhole and practiced his reload trick. For seconds. 3.8. 3.5. No one was watching. No one cared. April 28, 1945. Private Harold Meeks died in an ambush. Meeks, the one who'd walked away when McKinney first showed them the reload trick, was on patrol when a Japanese sniper put a round through his chest from 80 yards out. He died instantly. No time to scream. No time to fire back. McKinney helped recover the body. Meeks was stiff and heavy and his blood had soaked into the jungle floor, turning the dirt black. They carried him back in silence. That made 6. 6 men dead. 6 men who might have lived if someone had listened. If someone had cared. If doctrine hadn't mattered more than survival. McKinney cleaned his rifle that night and thought about Screven County. About pine trees and white-tailed deer. About his father, who'd taught him to shoot when he was 7 years old and who'd told him, "Don't matter what anyone else thinks, Johnny. If it works, it works." It works, McKinney thought, and he kept practicing. May 8, 1945. The 7th man to die was Corporal Vincent Hayes. Hayes wasn't killed by mortars or rifles or bayonets. He was killed by a Type 97 fragmentation grenade that rolled into his foxhole while he was sleeping. The explosion was small and precise and brutal. Hayes didn't even have time to wake up. They buried him at noon. The chaplain said a prayer. Someone played taps on a dented bugle. And McKinney stood there in the heat, sweating through his uniform, thinking about how Hayes had once called him the runt, and laughed when McKinney struggled to carry a full ammunition crate. Now Hayes was in the ground, and McKinney was still here, still practicing, still waiting. May 10, 1945, 19:30 hours. Sergeant Kurtz pulled McKinney aside after evening chow. "Intelligence says the Japanese are planning something big," Kurtz said quietly. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. They've been probing our lines all week, testing gaps, looking for weak points. What do you need me to do, Sergeant? Stay sharp, keep your rifle clean, and if things go to hell, don't be a hero. Just stay alive." "Yes, Sergeant." Kurtz looked at him for a long moment. "You're a good soldier, McKinney. Don't let Hendricks convince you otherwise." "Thank you, Sergeant." Kurtz walked away. McKinney went back to his foxhole and checked his ammunition. 8 clips. 64 rounds of .30-06 Springfield. He had another 14 clips in reserve, 112 rounds total, stored in a canvas satchel under his bedroll. 176 rounds. He hoped it would be enough. May 11, 1945. 0347 hours. And now we're back where we started. John McKinney. Blood on his shoulder. Japanese voices in the dark. The machine gun emplacement 70 yards away, silent and lost. He didn't have time to think. Didn't have time to plan. He just moved. He grabbed his rifle. Grabbed his ammunition. And he ran. Not toward the gun. Toward the sound. Toward the voices. Toward the place where Company A's eastern flank had just collapsed and where 100 Japanese infantrymen were pouring through the gap like floodwater. He could see them now. Silhouettes against the faint pre-dawn light. 20, 30, 40. Too many to count. They were moving fast, organized, confident. They thought the line was broken. They thought the position was theirs. They were wrong. McKinney dropped behind a fallen dipterocarp tree. Massive thing, 3 feet in diameter, torn down by artillery weeks earlier, and brought his rifle up. The first Japanese soldier was 40 yards out. Moving left to right. McKinney led him by 2 feet, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the jungle. The soldier dropped. The others froze. McKinney fired again. Another soldier down. 35 yards this time. Center mass. Clean. Now they were shouting, turning, trying to locate him. McKinney shifted right, using the tree for cover, and fired twice more. 2 more down. For dead. 172 rounds remaining. The Japanese opened fire. Arisaka rounds smacked into the tree, throwing splinters and bark. McKinney ducked, counted to 3, and moved again. 10 feet to the left this time. Behind a termite mound. Big one, 4 feet tall, hard as concrete. He rose, fired, dropped, rose, fired, dropped. 6 dead. 7, 8. They were trying to flank him now. He could see them moving through the undergrowth, splitting into 2 groups. One group advancing on his left, one on his right. Classic envelopment. Smart. But McKinney wasn't staying still. He sprinted 20 yards east, keeping low, and slid behind a cluster of bamboo. Brought the rifle up. Found a target. Fired. 9 dead. The Garand pinged. Empty. McKinney's hands moved without thought. Thumb. Push. Click. Ready. 3.8 seconds. His eyes never left the tree line. He saw movement. Fired. Another soldier down. 10 dead. The Japanese were panicking now. He could hear it in their voices. Shouting. Confused. They'd expected resistance, sure, but not like this. Not one man. Not this accurate. Not this fast. McKinney moved again. Back toward the dipterocarp tree. 30 yards in 4 seconds. He slid into position and fired 3 times in rapid succession. 13 dead. A Type 89 mortar round hit 15 feet to his right. The blast was deafening. Dirt and shrapnel rained down. McKinney felt something hot graze his leg. Shrapnel, probably shallow, but he didn't stop. He rolled left, came up firing, and dropped 2 more soldiers who'd tried to advance under the mortar cover. A medic was changing the bandage on his shoulder. The cut had been stitched, 14 stitches, rough but functional. His leg was wrapped. His ribs were taped. Everything hurt. "You're lucky," the medic said. "Another inch to the left and that sword would have hit your subclavian artery. You'd have bled out in 30 seconds. McKinney didn't feel lucky. "How long was I out?" "About 18 hours. You lost a lot of blood. We pumped you full of plasma and sulfanilamide. You'll live, but you're not going back to the line for at least a week." "What about my company?" "Still holding. Thanks to you, apparently." The medic finished the bandage and stood up. "I heard what you did. 40 kills in half an hour. That's one for the record books." McKinney said nothing. "You'll probably get a medal," the medic continued. "Silver Star, maybe, or a Distinguished Service Cross." "I don't want a medal." "Yeah, well, the Army doesn't really care what you want." The medic left. McKinney lay there staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the sound of wounded men groaning in the beds around him. He thought about Mallory and Shaw and Fain and Castillo and Meeks and Hayes and the 7th man whose name he couldn't remember. He thought about the reload trick. Thumb, push, click, ready. And he thought about how no one had believed him. May 18, 1945. McKinney returned to Company A. The outpost had been reinforced. New sandbags. New gun emplacements. The machine gun, the one that had killed 7 men and nearly collapsed the entire flank, had been relocated to a better position with proper overhead cover. No one mentioned that McKinney had requested the same thing weeks earlier. Lieutenant Hendricks briefed him in the command tent. "You're being recommended for the Medal of Honor," Hendricks said flatly. "Congressional Medal. Highest decoration. You'll receive it in a ceremony stateside after the war ends." McKinney blinked. "Sir, I don't understand. You stopped a battalion-level assault with a single rifle. You saved 190 men. The math is pretty straightforward, Private." "Sir, you were just following orders and doing your duty." "Yes, that's what the citation will say." Hendricks looked at him coldly. "It will not mention the unauthorized tripod modification. It will not mention your insubordination. It will not mention anything that reflects poorly on command decisions. Are we clear?" McKinney felt something twist in his gut. "Yes, sir." "Good. You're dismissed." He left the tent. Sergeant Kurtz was waiting outside. "Congratulations," Kurtz said quietly. "For what?" "For surviving." McKinney looked at him. "Is that all this is? Surviving?" Kurtz didn't answer, just clapped him on the shoulder, the uninjured one, and walked away. June 3, 1945. The Japanese launched another attack. This time it was a full-scale offensive. 200 infantry supported by mortars and machine guns. They hit the line at dawn and pushed hard, trying to break through before reinforcements could arrive. McKinney was on the eastern perimeter again. Rifleman duty. He held his position for 4 hours, firing and reloading, until his hands were blistered and his rifle barrel was too hot to touch. He killed 16 enemy soldiers that day. Maybe 17. He lost count after the first hour. No one noticed. No one cared. It was just another engagement in a war that had gone on too long. That night, Sergeant Kurtz found him cleaning his rifle. "You okay, McKinney?" "Yeah." "You don't look okay." McKinney set the rifle down. "I keep thinking about Mallory, and Shaw, and Fain, and all the others. They died because command wouldn't listen. And now I'm getting a medal because I survived." "That's how it works," Kurtz said gently. "The living get the medals. The dead get the graves." "That's not right." "No, it's not. But it's the truth." Kurtz left. McKinney sat there in the dark, holding his rifle, tasting gun oil and blood. And he thought about Georgia. July 2nd, 1945. The war in the Pacific continued. Company A moved north, engaging Japanese holdouts in the mountains. Small skirmishes, ambushes, snipers, the kind of fighting where you didn't see the enemy until they were already shooting. McKinney fought in 11 more engagements over the next 6 weeks. He killed 32 enemy soldiers. He was wounded twice, once by shrapnel, once by a ricochet that grazed his thigh. He saved 3 men from a grenade blast by tackling them into a ditch. No one wrote it up. No one recommended him for anything. It was just Tuesday, August 15th, 1945. The war ended. McKinney was in a foxhole when he heard the news. Someone shouted it from the command tent. The Japanese had surrendered. It was over. Men cheered. Some cried. Some just sat there in shock, unable to process it. McKinney didn't feel anything, just numb. He thought about the 40 men he'd killed in 36 minutes. He thought about the 7 men who'd died before that. He thought about the reload trick and the tripod modification and all the things that no one had believed in. And he wondered if any of it had mattered. September 10th, 1945. McKinney was rotated stateside. He spent 3 weeks on a transport ship, sleeping in a cramped bunk and staring at the ceiling. His shoulder still ached. His ribs still hurt. His hands still smelled like gun oil even though he hadn't touched a rifle in 2 weeks. When he arrived in San Francisco, there were crowds, parades, banners, people cheering and waving flags. Felt surreal, distant, like it was happening to someone else. A WAC officer met him at the dock. "Private First Class McKinney?" "Yes, ma'am. You're to report to the Presidio at 0800 hours tomorrow. Medal ceremony." "Yes, ma'am." She handed him a folder with his orders and walked away. McKinney stood there holding the folder, watching the crowd, feeling like a ghost. September 11th, 1945. 0800 hours. The Presidio, San Francisco. The ceremony was brief and formal. A general whose name McKinney didn't catch read the citation aloud. It described the engagement at Dingalan Bay. It mentioned the 40 enemy soldiers killed. It praised McKinney's extraordinary heroism and indomitable courage. It didn't mention the reload trick. It didn't mention the tripod modification. It didn't mention Mallory or Shaw or Fain or Castillo or Meeks or Hayes or the 7th man. The general pinned the Medal of Honor to McKinney's chest. Cameras flashed. Someone applauded. McKinney stood at attention, staring straight ahead, feeling the weight of the medal against his uniform. Felt heavy. September 12th, 1945. McKinney was interviewed by a reporter from Stars and Stripes. "What was going through your mind during the battle?" the reporter asked. McKinney thought for a long moment. "I was thinking about staying alive." "Were you scared?" "Yeah." "Did you ever think about running?" "No." "Why not?" "Because my brothers were depending on me." The reporter wrote that down, asked a few more questions, thanked him, left. The article ran 2 days later. It was 3 paragraphs long, buried on page 7. McKinney's name was misspelled. October 1945 through December 1946. McKinney returned to Georgia. He moved back in with his parents in Screven County. Got a job at a lumber mill. Married a girl named Sarah who he'd known since grade school. They had a daughter, then a son. He didn't talk about the war. Didn't wear his Medal of Honor. Kept it in a drawer in the bedroom, wrapped in the original presentation case. Untouched. When people asked about it, and some did, he'd just say, "It was a long time ago." He still had the M1 Garand. The army had let him keep it as a souvenir. He cleaned it once a year on May 11th, alone in the garage while Sarah put the kids to bed. He'd run a patch through the barrel and oil the action and remember the sound of the Garand's ping and the smell of cordite and the weight of blood on his hands. And then he'd put it away and not think about it for another year. November 1981. John McKinney died of a heart attack at age 55. The funeral was small. Family. A few friends. A VFW honor guard who fired 3 volleys and played taps. His Medal of Honor was displayed on the casket, next to a folded flag. Sarah kept the medal, put it in a shadow box and hung it in the hallway of their house. His children looked at it sometimes, but they didn't really understand what it meant. They knew their father had been a soldier. They knew he'd been brave, but the details were vague, distant. The medal sat in the hallway for another 30 years. April 2015. Sarah McKinney died at age 87. Her children sold the house and donated most of the contents to charity. The Medal of Honor was given to the National Infantry Museum in Columbus, Georgia. Sits there now. Case number 347B. Second floor. Pacific Theater exhibit. Right next to a placard that reads, Medal of Honor, PFC John R. McKinney. May 11, 1945. Dingalan Bay, Luzon. For extraordinary heroism in action against enemy forces. No one mentions the reload trick. No one mentions the tripod modification. No one mentions the 7 men who died because command wouldn't listen. The medal sits behind glass. Polished. Perfect. Silent. And every day, hundreds of people walk past it without stopping. Because it's just another medal in a museum full of medals. Just another story in a war full of stories. Just another man who did what had to be done and then came home and lived quietly and died without recognition. But here's the thing. John McKinney saved 190 men with a reload trick that no one believed in. He held a line that should have collapsed. He stopped an assault that should have succeeded. He survived wounds that should have killed him. And he did it all with a rifle, a Georgia backwoods technique, and the kind of stubborn courage that doesn't care about doctrine or recognition or medals. He did it because someone had to, and because no one else would. The M1 Garand he used that night is gone now. Lost somewhere in the decades between 1945 and today. Maybe destroyed. Maybe sitting in someone's attic, forgotten and rusting. The machine gun emplacement is gone too. Swallowed by jungle. Reclaimed by time. The men he saved went on to live full lives. They had children, grandchildren, careers, homes, dreams. Most of them never knew his name. Never knew that the reason they survived was because a 130-pound kid from Georgia refused to die. And McKinney never told them. Because that's not why he did it. He did it because it was Tuesday. Because the line needed holding. Because 7 men had already died and he wasn't going to be the 8th. He did it because sometimes one person in one moment can change everything. Even if no one ever knows. Even if no one ever cares. Even if the only record is a medal in a museum and a 3-paragraph article on page 7. So if you made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. Because stories like this shouldn't be forgotten. Men like John McKinney shouldn't be forgotten. Even if the world already has.